Lesson planning. What all teachers must do in order to have effective lessons is to plan them. Like any other good building, has to have some structure and scaffolding. So here we go. Let's look into this. We must have some effective tools. Kagan and Jensen are providing you some effective tools as we're going through this semester. And of course, the pieces of the lesson cycle, and that's part of our lesson designing our lessons. There are several kinds or types of the lesson designs, like the 5E model that a lot of science lessons may take, or we have different other math lessons, but they're all pretty much the same, just the terminologies, the vocabulary is a little different, but when we look at these, you'll notice that they're meaning the same thing. For instance, anticipatory set means the same thing as focus, same thing as engagement, just a little bit of different twist. So the first thing before you even go to planning your lessons is you need to know two major things, or you have to make some decisions. First off, you need to know your students. You need to know the types of learners you have, what are their needs, what are their background, what kind of coherence they have with that lesson that's being planned. And then you need to decide two major points, like what are you going to be teaching? What do you want your students to know? A lot of us are guided by our campus curriculum guides as far as what to teach. And of course, the TEKS are there to guide all K-12 instructions as far as what to teach and what the state wants to make sure that your students know. Then how you are going to assess them. How are you going to know that they understand what you just taught them? Okay? So there's a variety of ways you can have them, you check for understanding, just some simple formative checking for understanding, looking around the classroom, or are you going to have them do projects or take a test? So what are you going to do to assess? So let's get started for the beginning part of our lesson cycle. It has to start with an objective. And the objective has three major parts. Now I'm going to show you two different ways of seeing or formulating your objective. I'm going to lean more to one called CBC, but there's also an ABCD. I just thought giving you two different versions of looking at this, that way you can latch onto the one that you like best, okay? So today in class, students will identify and define all three parts of the objective and all six parts of the lesson cycle. So here's our part one of our lesson planning cycle, is we have to create our, like I said, create our objective. And the objective has three main parts: the condition, the behavior, and the criteria. The condition is always what are your students going, how are they going to get through the lesson? Are they going to need some specific materials, types of technology? Are they going to be working in partners or in teams or individually? Are you going to take them to another location, maybe outside the classroom that's not normal? Maybe you're teaching a lesson on clouds, cloud formations or names of clouds. And so maybe that particular day, you're going to take your students outside, out by the gazebo or something. So that would be a condition. Maybe they're going to need some note paper or in teams be working together. Those are conditions. Okay? Now, behavior. Behavior is always your action verb from Bloom's taxonomy. And we have a list, or I've given you a list of several links of the Bloom's taxonomy information in your Weebly links. Okay, but it's an action verb, like they're going to list, they're going to create, they're going to identify, they're going to label, they're going to write. It has to be something that is seen and measurable. I cannot measure the students will understand. How do you know they will understand? Well, it's going to be through that action verb of either writing or listing or labeling or drawing, something like that, or creating. You have to be able to see it and measure it. So that's your measurable action verb. And then what it is are you measuring? Are you measuring, what kind of content are you looking at the weather cycle or the water cycle? Are you looking at the life cycle? Are you measuring how many beats in a quarter note or eighth notes? What is it that you're measuring? And then, of course, the criteria. You as the teacher, what are you doing to set the criteria? What, are you expecting 50% mastery or 100% mastery? You determine how much you want to measure or what you feel is successful in your class at that time. Okay, and this slide here is pretty self-explanatory about the benefits of having planned lessons. Your classroom management, first off, is much better because you know where you're going. It's not coming off the fly. And granted, even though you may have the most well-rehearsed and planned lesson, sometimes it doesn't go exactly the way you want it, but it's easier for you to make those changes as you see fit in the classroom because you have planned that lesson well. You can tweak it as you're going if needed, okay? So the characteristics of a good objective, we just got through saying CBC is content or condition, behavior, and criteria. But here's another way of looking at it. Is A, who should be doing the performing? For instance, your students. What is a learner to do? That's your action verb and your behavior. What are they doing? And the conditions, what are they going to be learning, will encounter with, or are they going to be working with partners? Are they going to need a certain software, that kind of thing. And then, of course, the criteria or the degree of mastery, how well is the performance being done. So here, both of these have been looked at as ABCD or CBC. So you decide how you want to write your objective. Many times in the classroom, you see it written on the board of I will, you will, and that's an objective written in student ease, in their language for them to see. Sometimes you see much more abbreviated types of objectives, but for right now, we need to learn how to write a complete one-sentence objective. Okay, so looking at this, at the end of this course, using a PC with Microsoft Word software, students in Keyboarding 101 will be able to type at least 60 words per minute with no more than 3 mistakes. Okay? So if we're using our CBC, what is our condition? Well, it'll be at the end of the course, using a PC with Microsoft software, and students in Keyboarding 101, that gives us the specific group of students. That's our condition. Okay. What is our behavior? Well, our action verb, type. What are they typing? At least 60 words per minute. And then what is our criteria or degree of mastery? No more than 3 mistakes. Okay. Now here is our Bloom's taxonomy. Let me move you over here. We always start at the bottom. Remember, understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, and create. These are the higher order thinking skills, the HOTS, to analyze, evaluate, and create, and the LOTS are the lower order thinking skills. Remember, understand, and apply. When you're beginning a unit, or especially in your lower grades, a lot of remember and understand. Yes, I know I said earlier that you cannot use the verb understand, but this is not in Bloom's, this is just a category. Look at our verbs over here: classify, describe, discuss, explain, identify, and so forth. Okay, so we can't use the word the student will understand because, again, I need to be able to measure, and I cannot measure the word understand. Okay, so we're going to skip over that. Skip over that, skip over that. Okay, now, the next part of our lesson design or lesson cycle is focus. We have to find out a way to grab focus for our students to get them engaged into the lesson. Okay, so when we look at how sometimes it could be a simple picture, it could be a song, it could be a review from the previous day. For instance, just having the students turn to their shoulder partners and talk about what did we do yesterday. It could be doing an all right round robin, or it could be a quick write where you just have them write down anything to kind of get them into the lesson to begin the lesson. Okay, so then part 2, we've written our objective, We've got, we're ready to move into our focus, and this is where we're framing our lesson. We have to make our lesson attractive to the students to where they're engaged and you're tapping into their prior knowledge, what they may already know about it. Remember, coherence is like having that coat hangers in the closet so that you can have something to hang on to, and otherwise if your coats are going to be on the ground with no hangers in the closet, right? And then of course repetition. A lot of times repetition, you're repeating quite a few times. Maybe you're setting the stage for something that you've done in the past and you're coming back with it, or maybe you've kind of previewed a little bit and then now you're going to the lesson. So that's some forms of repetition. So the next part, after you have gotten your focus written, is the next part is instructional delivery. Okay, this is the meat of the lesson. This is where the teacher has the time for Sage on the Stage, and we're not talking for an hour. We're talking maybe 10, 15 minutes at the max, is giving that instructional delivery. Now, one of the things that you need to think about when it comes to lesson designs is not as linear as it looks on paper. On paper, it looks very linear, like step 1, step 2, step 3, 4, 5, 6, and out, you're done. But it doesn't work like that. Usually, lesson cycles gets very messy. It kind of goes in circles and moves around. You start off and give a little instruction, then maybe go back to focus, and you go to some practice, and it kind of moves around. But at any part of it, when you have the instructional delivery, you have to give them some content to them, so that and you scaffold it. You give them some modeling, and you give them you give your students some meat. Well, like I said, the meat of the lesson. But look at the critical factors. You have engagement and coherence and input quantity. Input quantity, remember, is this teacher needs to control how much are you going to give them at one time. Now, that doesn't mean just chunk away the rest of the information. You still need to teach the information. It's just how you chunk it. It's just like when you're teaching students at the very beginning to form or figure out larger words when they're reading, is that they break the words down. Well, the same thing with instructional delivery. Break the content down to manageable chunks, and let the students practice and then come back to it and keep moving and growing with that. And then, of course, you always have to be checking for understanding. All the way when you're going through, even in focus, instructional delivery, check for understanding. Use some kind of thumbs up or fingers on the chest or cards, green and red cards or something in your hand, so that you can have the students, you can see, you can look around the room to make sure that they're understanding where you're going with the lesson. Okay? So then part 4, guided practice. You have modeled, you've given them information, now you need to have the students practice, but not alone. Guided practice is where that you're working together. You could be modeling whole class, that could be guided practice. You could have your students working together in small groups, that's guided practice with you going around. And one of the major parts of guided practice is look for those chances that you need to help correct errors, because that error correction is very important to happen at this point. If you don't correct the error, then they would have learned it wrong. And something that is learned takes over 100 repeats to unlearn the wrong thing, to replace it with the correct information. So it's very important that you give them that feedback. And then, of course, repetition. Okay, and notice over here it's formative assessment. Remember in our authentic assessment, we have formative and summative are 2 major forms of assessments. Well, formative, you're assessing constantly. Checking for understanding is a formative assessment. We could do little short, having students stand up, sit down type of thing. That could be a formative assessment. You can have them move. There's a structure called 4 corners where you put A, B, C, D in the different corners of the classroom, and you could call out a question or something that has answer choices, just like clickers, and you have the students move physically to one side of the room to find to their choice of answer. That's very visual of seeing if they're understanding the material or not. Then the 5th part is independent practice. We have introduced it, you've taught it, you've practiced it with the students, they've practiced with each other. Now they need to do this by themselves. And a lot of times, sad to report, that it's homework worksheets. Those aren't the best types of independent practice, but sometimes that's what teachers use, and that's not bad, but it's just how much it's used, okay? One of the things that shows in independent practice could be even tests, okay? So you may, after one lesson, you're not ready to give them a test. So there's other forms of independent practice that maybe you're just going to have them work on a few problems in math, or maybe you're going to have them create some kind of story problem on their own, or write a story, anything that they're doing independently, okay? But look at our critical factors. We're using coherence, error correction still, because we need to give them feedback on this independent practice, and then repetition, okay? Then we have closure. How did we do in the class? How did the class do as far as closure goes? Okay? Is we still checking for understanding? And sometimes closure could be asking your students to do a ticket out the door, an exit ticket. Sometimes closure is just having them do an all right round robin at the table, and then asking a couple of the students to summarize what they did for the day. Sometimes it's just some journal writing. It's what you want to do to close that lesson. Now, with that in mind, one lesson may take a couple of days to cover it. So you have to have mini closures, like small little closures before you just say, okay, put away the books, let's go to reading. Or okay, this time's up, the bell is rung, bye. You still need to have some kind of closure to let the students know that the lesson has come to an end, or maybe a temporary end until the next day, okay? So I like to look for some little cartoons or stuff. Here, sometimes you could have works, like I said earlier, some really good lesson. I mean, you planned it, it worked really well in your mind, but you look out in the class and they're going, what? And then you're making some improvisations as you're going along. You're improvising, which is not a bad thing, because sometimes you have to even come back the next day and go, oh, my bad, I didn't get this right for you. Let's try this again. And your students will understand. They're very forgiving as long as you're very sincere with them and you've given them respect, they'll respect you back.